Bovine growth hormone was the flagship product of Monsanto, our friends in Monsanto. And the idea was it's basically a steroid that you give, a growth hormone that you give to dairy cows. The idea was basically to take your least productive dairy cows, zap them with this hormone, they produce more milk, they burn out quicker, but you get more milk. So a very cruel and very mechanistic way to think about your dairy cows. You know, take your weakest ones, give them the steroid, they'll produce more milk, you make some money, and then of course you'll burn them out. It was used a lot in the 1990s. But more and more consumers heard about it. You know, we had this great food movement that said we do not want to buy dairy products that are derived from cows that have been treated with BGH, bovine growth hormone. And more labels popped up, and so Monsanto then sued, and it said, you know, it said to anybody who's trying to label it, you can't label it. They went to court, they went to federal court, and they lost. And the court said, no, label's accurate, people have the right to know. So guess what? Monsanto sold the product. BGH is no longer a Monsanto product. They lost their flagship product. They sold it to Elanco. It's not used all that much anymore. So it's really not a major problem anymore, but you know, you certainly want to stick with organic, and you certainly want to stick with people who say no BGH. But again, it's a real victory story for the food movement and those who said, you know what, we're not going to let you do this to these dairy cows. We're not going to buy food that's based in that kind of cruelty that causes laminitis and mastitis and all these terrible things with cows. So it's really great. It's a really great story for the food movement. Well, soil is a great mystery. You know, we don't really even understand soil. There are more living things in a teaspoon of soil than an acre of rainforest. You know, the soil really contains the microbes that are absolutely critical for our survival and for all the crops that we grow. Unfortunately, industrial agriculture, massive monoculturing, exhausts the soil. It destroys the soil. And with the pesticides, especially insecticides, but other things that we put, that also kills the microbes in the soil. And so we have been destroying topsoil at an alarming rate. We're exhausting topsoil at between 13 and 15 times the rate at which it can regenerate itself. So this is terrible in and of itself. Topsoil is one of the treasures of the earth. There's different kinds of topsoils all over the earth, by the way. We happen to have one of the best kinds in the United States. We're very lucky, you know, geographically, as a nation, to have this great topsoil that can be so productive. But we've abused it. We've overly exploited it through our monoculture, through our industrial agriculture, and so now we have a serious problem. So how have we addressed this problem of the exhaustion of topsoil? Synthetic fertilizers. This is a disaster because we know what that synthetic fertilizer does. We know it creates huge algae blooms, dead zones, destroys entire water systems. It can create massive water contamination. Synthetic fertilizers are a disaster. Plus, they contribute to nitrous oxide, which creates climate change. So we need the soil to survive. There's a whole wonderful regenerative movement right now across the country and across the world. Last year was a World Soil Year, and we got tremendous activism. I'm thankful to say that our own USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, which I'm not always happy with, is doing some great programs at soil remediation. There's some really great pioneering work being done all across the country, including, by the way, in Hawaii, where I've seen a lot of great work in California, all the way across the country to remediate soil and to let people understand that there's a difference between dirt and soil. You know, one of the, synonyms for earth is soil. So when we say protect the earth, remember, fundamentally it also means protecting our soil. You know, another incredibly important thing about soil is that it naturally sequesters carbon. This is really critical if we're going to address climate change, because we know we're going to have to stop burning fossil fuels. We know what we're going to have to stop doing to just stop this terrible juggernaut of climate change, right? Climate chaos, as I like to call it. We also know that we're going to have to start using green energy in replacement of that. But what about all that carbon out there? How are we going to get rid of that? The way to get rid of that is through soil. When we remediate soil, it actually sequesters the carbon. It takes the carbon out of the air, puts it in the ground, which means it is the best way. So if you think of a three-part stool with climate change, one part, stop the fossil fuel. Others, green energy. Third leg of the stool, remediate soil because it will sequester that carbon. It is the answer. We don't need crazy new technologies to get that carbon. We don't need to put saran wrap around the world or put iron in the oceans. All these things people are suggesting, it's nonsense. This whole geoengineering thing is very dangerous. But what we do need is to bioremediate soil, make our soils healthy again, and they'll take that carbon out. So that's an extraordinarily important, vital, crucial added advantage of making our soils healthy again. The critical thing with remediating soil is to create an environment where soil can have these microbes that it needs. And so this is the really critical aspect of composting. Composting, when I was recently in Africa, composting is a required course in Ethiopia, in grammar school and in high school. They understand it's enormous important. Every gardener out there knows it's important. We know it's very, very important to create that compost, to create the conditions under which soil and those microbes can get healthy and grow. And when they do that, we turn dirt into soil. And soil, again, has all that life that helps the plants grow. It's critical in the growth of plants. But also importantly, if we're right now having huge water shortages, not just in this country, around the world, soil also keeps water. It holds water. If you've ever seen a demonstration, you pour water over what we would call dirt, it goes right through. And that's when you get your flooding, that's when you get your waste, your water goes away. Soil holds that water. So soil is just so magical. I mean, it's the answer to climate change. It's what we need to grow all the plants of the world. We all need, all the biotic community of the world needs it. And it helps us with our water situation. And I think it's also really interesting that we don't really quite even understand it yet. We don't really know what all those microbes are doing, which is why it's so terrible when we destroy so many of them through our pesticides, through our misuse of soil, because we don't even know what we're doing. We don't even know what we're killing. It's really critical that we understand, and we don't understand this. It has not been discussed by your major media at all. We are at the end of the age of extraction. The entire industrial system was built on going through, X million, 20 million, people, 200 million, people aren't sure, but that many years it took to get these fossil fuels in the ground from the dinosaurs, from those ages. All that fossil fuel we went through in about 150 years. So it took 20 to 200 million years to build. We've been in a big spending spree, big party. We've gone through all of that in 150 years, put it all in the atmosphere, causing climate change. So it's been but the party's over. The party is over. And, what's happened is that all the low-hanging fruit, all the easy gas, coal, that's all gone. We could have always done deep water drilling. We could have always done mountaintop removal that we're seeing. We could always have done tar sands. We could always have done fracking, but they're expensive. They cause enormous environmental destructive. They're very, very dangerous, as we've all seen. And now that all that easy energy is gone, we're having to do these much more dramatic, we have to go to much more difficult to find. And this is the end of this age. But again, two problems with it. One is, it isn't gonna last. We're gonna go through that. The second is, the less fossil fuel we have, the less of this energy we get, the more dramatic, the deeper we're going to have to go in the earth, the farther we're going to have to go in the ocean, the more dramatic we're going to have to do our fracking. And that is going to cause tremendous both human health harm, environmental harm, and climate change. And here's how it's going to happen. It's not that we're ever going to run out of gas or coal or oil. It's not going to happen. What's going to happen is it's going to cost more to get your gallon of gas than you're going to get out of it. So you're going to hit a market level. We're saying, you know what? It doesn't pay us anymore to do this. It's so dramatic, the technology and the energy we need, right? It's just cost too much. And then even if a government says, we don't care, we're going to subsidize that, we don't care about the market, then you've got an energy issue. It's going to take more energy to get that unit of energy than you're getting out of it. So in other words, you can take more energy to get that gallon of gas or to get that pound of coal than you're going to get out of that. So we're never going to, this idea, when are we going to run out, is not the right question. The question is, when is it no longer going to be profitable? And then even if governments like China or ourselves were to subsidize it, when is it going to take more energy to get that energy out of the earth? And that will, Donald Trump, who keeps saying coal, 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 and the Republicans, drill, baby, drill, which is dumb, baby, dumb, they don't understand that by the time Barron Trump becomes his father's age, Donald Trump's son becomes his age, it's all over. And countries like Germany and others who are preparing this with green energy, it's going to be a soft landing. The more we stick to this dangerous, environmentally destructive, human health destructive technologies and stick to it stubbornly, we're going to have a very, very hard landing in the United States. Very hard landing unless we change course pretty quickly. When we talk about pesticides, the first thing to think about is that the right name? Are they really pesticides? So we know under pesticides, under the large umbrella pesticides, you've got insecticides that kill insects, you've got herbicides that kill weeds, you've got fungicides that kill fungi, and you've got rodenticides that kill rodents. That's under the overall thing pesticides. But let's take a look at insecticides, right? We know, for example, the most widely used insecticide in the world is neonicotinoid, these nicotine-based neurotoxins that they're using in corn. But they're not killing pests just, they're killing bees. As a matter of fact, they're killing bees at such an alarming rate, it is a national emergency. 80% of many of the hives were killed just last year. So it's not a pesticide, is it, if it's killing non-pests? And now we know that that same neurotoxin can kill birds. And now we look at a herbicide like Monsanto's Roundup that we're spraying by the millions and millions of pounds because of genetically engineered corn and soy, and we now know it's a probable carcinogen. Well, that means it's killing humans. Well, we're not pests. Your children aren't pests, right? So this word pesticides hides a terrible truth, which is these aren't pesticides, these are biocides. They kill anything that's living. And just because they're convenient to the industrial agriculture system to kill a certain weed or kill a certain pest, they're not limited to that. They're non-specific, they're broad spectrum. They will kill, in many cases, insects, plants that we need. I mean, Roundup, for example, you spray Roundup unless it's genetically engineered on your flowers, the flowers die. It kills anything that's green. It doesn't go, I know what a weed is. The insecticide says, oh, I know an insect, that's a bad insect, that's a good insect. No, we shouldn't be hurting children. They don't know that. So we should stop the word pesticides altogether and call these biocides. And that tells you why we shouldn't use them, because it's a culture of death. It's the culture of death. Most of those were invented for warfare use and then taken from warfare use into industrial agriculture use in the second half of the 20th century. And that is their history. And so this war on bugs, this war on supposed weeds, is actually a war on all of life, including us. Another thing we have to realize is that we are also at the end of what I call the end of the age of extermination. Industrial society and industrial agriculture are based on this idea of extermination. Well, what do I mean by that? It's anything that doesn't fit with the system. If you've got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres of corn, and they think, oh, we don't want this plant, we're going to call a weed in there. Or now that you've created this huge smorgasbord for insects, oh, we got to kill all those insects, right? The idea is to eliminate anything that doesn't fit with the system. If you look at a bigger picture of what industrial society did, for example, in what we now call the developing world, or what we did to the Native Americans in this country, they didn't fit our system. They didn't fit our religion. So what do? Genocide. This idea that you can exterminate, eliminate anything that doesn't fit in your system. And the entire biocide, so-called pesticides, we call them biocides, right? This is all based on that idea. We're going to eliminate those insects. We're going to eliminate those weeds. But there's a problem with that idea. It completely ignores adaptation. It says, oh, those weeds will never adapt to our poisons. Our poisons are too strong. Those insects will never adapt. But they do, and they have. And right now, we are at peak herbicides. Roundup was the last broad spectrum herbicide that we have. Now, in order to kill some of these weeds, these super weeds that are now resistant, you can't kill them with Roundup, we've gone back to an element of Agent Orange. We've forgotten Vietnam, that's 2,4-D. Dicamba, one of those dangerous, volatile herbicides in the world. We're in a chemical arms race backwards to try and kill these weeds that are becoming super weeds, and they're already getting resistant to 2,4-D, and they're already getting resistant to dicamba. So we're at peak herbicide. That's over, right? nature bats last, and for those baseball fans out there, it bats 1,000. It will always win. And we're seeing this in an analogous way with antibiotics. The idea before, as we all know, you went to the doctor, you had a bad bacteria, they killed every bacteria. They give you an antibiotic. Now that antibiotic, just like these herbicides and these insecticides, they don't know what is a good bacteria or bad. They just kill all your bacteria. And you try and replace it, you hopefully later. We are learning now that doesn't work. The bugs are getting resistant with the help of industrial farming, animal farming, sadly. But still, we have all these antibiotic resistance. So what are we doing? We're going to probiotics. That's smart. We're saying the answer here isn't to kill everything. The answer is to nurture and build up a healthy biome, a healthy human system through probiotics. We're going to have to do the same thing in the new agriculture. We're going to have to say, forget biocides. That was a disastrous experiment. Nature bats last. We're at the end, by the way, end of fungicides too, not just herbicides, right? So we're going to have to do this anyway. It's not like we have a choice. We're going to be overrun with these super weeds. The entire U.S. agriculture will be overrun with them in 10 to 20 years. We're going to have to find new ways of working with, not against, bugs and these plants that we call weeds, and learning how they can serve, how they can help us, how we can help them, how we can nurture healthier soils, healthier systems, and we can also have far more diverse agriculture that will also deal with a lot of these problems. One of the things that irritates me a lot is when people that take our position on whether it be GMOs or industrial agriculture or climate change, that we are called anti-scientific or not scientific. Monsanto, for example, in the late 1990s, when they were getting the approval for their Roundup Ready, Roundup tolerant corn and soy and cotton, the genetically engineered cotton that would resist it. So you could spray your Roundup on these crops. It would kill the weeds, but not kill your soy, your cotton, or your corn. They said, don't worry, because people said, wait a minute, if we spray all that Roundup on these weeds, won't the weeds develop resistance? And Roundup scientists went to Congress and said, no, there's an enzyme in this herbicide, this biocide, that and it kind of cleverly will avoid any kind of adaptation. Darwin won't work. Adaptation won't work on these weeds. Complete scientific nonsense. I mean, you know, I looked it up, and adaptation is taught in the 3rd grade in the Washington, D.C. school system. So Monsanto scientists were going to Congress, and they were actually showing a scientific knowledge less than the average 3rd grader in Washington, D.C. So you talk about anti-science, complete nonsense, showing an unbelievable ignorance about the basis of their herbicide. Now, they may have just been corrupt and lying. I guess we have to say that. But still, even to suggest that, and that anybody in Congress bought it, shows that a profound ignorance of the science involved. And now we have seen that's completely, you know, it's been completely exposed. We now have, in well over half of all the farms in the United States, we have these super weeds. Right? We have got, you know, pigweed in the South that grows up like it's about the consistency of a baseball bat, grows closely together. You cannot even knock that over with a combine. Only way you can get rid of that is through human labor of trying to chop it all down. So this is a huge threat. Weed scientists, even mainstream weed scientists in the United States are saying we have a huge crisis in American agriculture caused by this overuse of these herbicides that has created this resistance in all these farms and all these different weeds. And industrial agriculture simply doesn't have an answer for this. The answer is going to be agroecology. It's going to be whole new ways of dealing, you know, with our so-called weed issues and our insect issues. And that we have the science for. It's called agroecology, and that's the future. Certainly not this continuing cycle of trying to use more and more herbicides and insecticides and these biocides and thinking that nature will not adapt. Monsanto was wrong. They will adapt. They have adapted. And that entire paradigm is really Neanderthal biology. It is Neanderthal biology. Well, dead zones are just like the name implies. They're dead, because the oxygen has been taken out of those zones, deprived. Nothing can live without oxygen. So you have dead zones the size of like the state of Connecticut. I mean, and you have these, and whenever you have an overuse of nitrogen-based fertilizer. Remember, we have so abused and exploited our soil that we had to put nitrogen on it to keep growing these industrial crops. Put that in, well, what happens? Rain comes, washes it into the rivers. goes down the rivers into these deltas, stays there, right? The nitrogen, you have all these blooms, these algae blooms. What do they soak up? What do the algae blooms? They soak up oxygen. And then you've seen it all on television, these huge fish kills. I mean, you see thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths of fish because they are deprived of oxygen. Nothing can live there. Nothing can live. So in order to grow these plants through synthetic, fertilizers, often created through oil, by the way. So we want soil, not oil. That's 1 7-second soundbite you want there. We want soil, not oil here. And we know the result of that by trying to last gasp, put these millions and millions of pounds of fertilizer on our land to try and keep industrial agriculture alive for 5 or 10 more years before the whole paradigm collapses. We have this terrible result, which is the deprivation of oxygen in these huge areas called dead zones, and where nothing can live at all. It's really a chilling kind of metaphor, too, for what I call the culture of death. Not only are we killing everything with our biocides, pesticides so-called, but we're also killing so much through this use of synthetic fertilizers. So just as we need a worldwide movement, we're getting a worldwide movement to finally protect our soils, to realize how vital soil is, that it's really the basis of all life. We need just a strong movement to say there's a bad guy here, and the bad guy is synthetic fertilizer, and dead zones is only one of the terrible things that result from that. I mentioned before, it's also, because of nitrous oxide, contributing to climate change. I mean, along with soil, one of the essentials for all life is water. And again, the industrial system uses water in a way that's not sustainable. We've seen this with the Colorado River, for example. The Colorado River, if you look now where it ends in Mexico, it's just a dribble. Sometimes it doesn't even reach the ocean. And this is because of the overuse of this river through industrial agriculture and through the beef culture. Remember, the production of meat involves a huge and wasteful amount of water. Now, if you look at the Ogallala Aquifer that stretches from the north of our country all the way down into the far south, that again has been overused because of agriculture and overpopulation. In many areas, we're down 40 to 50%. Now, it takes about 1,500 years for the Ogallala Aquifer to fill itself up, 1,500 years. So for all practical purposes, that's a non-renewable resource if we keep using it the way it is. It's renewable if we were to not abuse it, but because we've abused it, you're talking about hundreds of years to get back to where we would need to be. So that we keep talking about non-renewable and renewable resources. In many ways, the passenger pigeon was a renewable resource. It blackened the sky when the first colonialists hit America, and now it's extinct. So when you abuse a renewable resource in such a way as we're doing with water in these aquifers and in our rivers, they become non-renewable very, very quickly. And that is going to be a major, major issue. We're already seeing water wars. We're seeing litigation in our country from state to state, arguing who gets the water. We're seeing water wars in Africa. We're seeing water wars in Asia. So this is going to be also a huge problem with civil strife, with nation-to-nation conflict. Water is essential. You can live without food for a while. You can't live without water for very long. So it is an absolutely critical moment for us to begin to really understand the number one waster of water in the world, and that is industrial agriculture. It is yet another huge menace, and why we have to get rid of this system and get the organic and beyond system in its place pretty soon. When we look at an alternative agriculture to this industrial agriculture, right, we need to look at what I call the essentials. What do you need to grow a plant? You need water, you need soil, you need seed, you need farmers, you need the sun, you need pollinators, and you need animals or other natural sources of nitrogen, including composting, right? Well, how is the industrial agriculture system done with this? Well, we said it's exploited soil 13 to 15 times more than it can regenerate itself. We're exhausting our aquifers and our rivers. We're in a huge water crisis. We've monocultured our seeds, which is terrible, because in a climate change world, we don't know what seeds we're going to need in which area to be able to survive this climate chaos, right? Farmers, we've lost in the United States alone 10 million farmers and 5 million farms in my lifetime. Farmers have the highest rate of suicide of any occupation by far. The average age of a farmer in the United States is 58 years old. This is what we've done to industrial agriculture, our farm community, through these huge monocultures and massively increasing the overhead costs. Pollinators, we're in a disastrous situation with our pollinators. Absolutely crisis, disastrous situation. 70, 80% of our hives gone. In animals, instead of having animals as a natural source of nitrogen, fertilizer in our farms, we've taken 10 billion of them, put them in these horrible animal factories where they don't see soil at all. And then instead of their waste matter being something that can be something to help our fertilizing our soil, it becomes huge lagoons of waste, which create methane, which then creates climate change, climate chaos. So in every one of those areas, those are your essentials. Those are the essentials that we need. We can see directly that industrial agriculture destroys each of the essentials that we need. So what's the answer? We need to use soil only in such a manner as to allow it to regenerate itself. We need to say we can use water, but we have to use it at a pace where it can regenerate itself. We have to have a huge diversity of seeds, healthy farm communities, a healthy pollinator community, and take animals out of those horrifying factories and put them back on the land where they can become a sustainable source of nitrogen. It isn't that hard. It isn't that hard. It goes against a lot of people's profit interest, but it is not hard conceptually to understand what we need. And it's really important to understand how the market system is completely antithetical to nature, how it's really the enemy of nature. You think of everyone eats tuna fish. Tuna fish every sandwich place in America. Tuna fish, right? And we have a growing population. So we have more demand for tuna fish. But the tuna out there, they have not read Adam Smith. They don't know anything about the market system. They're not saying, hey, there's more people, they want more tuna fish. Come on, folks, let's reproduce more tuna. They don't know that. So when you have more demand and less supply, because that supply needs to regenerate along natural regeneration, right? You have the recipe for extinction. The topsoil doesn't know about the market, doesn't know, we need more food for supply and demand, we need more, water doesn't know that. So instead of having our entire system, our food system, our agricultural system, or agribusiness system, since there's not much culture left in it, let's not call it agriculture, let's call it agribusiness. We need to restore the culture in agriculture, right? So agribusiness, right, is based completely on market. That has to change. We have to understand that all of our economics, including our food economics, has to be a wholly owned subsidiary of ecology. Unless we re-embed our entire understanding of how we behave as humans, agriculture and all the other areas, to the natural regenerative rhythms of the natural world, we are in big trouble as far as surviving as a species. The market system was invented by a couple of guys in Scotland in the 18th century. That has nothing to do with that's dream world. That's fantasy world with the stock market and the market. That's all dreamy land. That's all fantasy. And that party is over. We need to take a serious look and say, what? We need to comport our behavior here, including how we grow our food, with the ecological realities. We can't expect topsoil, tuna, or water supplies to somehow understand the market system. That's delusional. And we're in denial about that. And I have a master's degree in psychology along with my law degree. I know delusion and denial when I see it. I think another important point is that, in a dogmatic market system, capitalist market system like we have, we insist that everything be a commodity. But everything isn't a commodity. A commodity are things that we make for sale. We don't make soil for sale. We don't make water. That is made by the earth. We don't make the tuna fish. We don't. Nature makes them. And if we try and turn these commodities based solely on supply and demand, we're ignoring nature, and that imperils us, right? Because they aren't going to respond to that system for very much longer. So the entire market system is based on commodity, and that has huge impacts for human social justice as well. For example, shouldn't healthy, non-toxic food be the right of every child in America? Shouldn't that be the right of every child? I think it should be the right of every person in America. But if for some reason you say, well, I think adults should take more responsibility but what about child? You can't blame a child whether their parents succeeded in the market system. So if you don't believe that, and the United States was the only country last March during the beginning of the Trump administration to vote against a UN resolution saying that food is the right of every person in the world. We voted against it. So if you don't believe that, you're saying the market should decide. You're saying the market should survive on whether children live or die, or whether they have enough food so they can have adequate brain development. The market will decide. Really? Is that who we are? Is that who we are as a country? We're going to say our children's brain development, their very survival will just depend on whether their parents were successful or not in the market? That's not a country I want to live in. That is not, that has nothing to do with social justice. And as long as we treat food as solely a commodity, and we don't have an extensive, and a far more expensive thing than we do, of making sure that every child has not just food, but safe, non-toxic food, then we are literally saying we don't care. Let the market decide. During my lifetime, depending on the statistics you read, we've lost between 70 and 90% of our vegetable and fruit seed varieties. And we've done this because the big ag companies, this agribusiness says, you know, it's easiest for us to harvest a certain kind, you know, if it has a big stock, if it has this, it's easier for us to do this. It's cheaper for us to have huge monocultures of one particular seed type. And so for a long time, we had an extraordinary reduction in the amount of food, the variety of foods that are available to us. You know, a couple different kinds of apples, a couple different kinds of tomatoes. You know, there are hundreds and hundreds of varieties of apples. There's hundreds of varieties of tomatoes, hundreds of varieties of onions. We're doing better. We're seeing a little bit more variety, but we still have lost those as far as our commercial market is concerned. And unless we stop a very dangerous pattern we're seeing in the world, that's not going to get much better. Right now, Monsanto owns over 1/4 of all the commercial seeds in the world. If you add them with Syngenta, Dow, Bayer, and a few others, they own over 60% of all. These are chemical companies owning all the commercial seeds of the world. Now, here's the point. When they own them, and patent many of them, by the way, when they do that, they don't use them all. They deep six them. They say, we're not going to use these. We're just going to put them on the back shelf there because they were competing with our seeds. And we want only our seeds out there in the market. We want to tell all the farmers of the world, here's the 3 or 4 seeds you have to choose from that we few companies are giving to you. And you don't have the other choice because we own them, and if you use them, you're breaking our patent or breaking a license agreement. So it's not like they're buying up all these seeds because they want to see more seed variety. They're doing it to get rid of those seeds so they'll only have their seeds on the market. Now, there's a couple of ways we can fight against this. One is my organization, the Center for Food Safety. What we've done is we've started an international seed saving network. So all the seed savers in the world can talk to each other. It's like a big dating site, except instead of dating, you're sharing seeds. And you get to know each other, and it's very complex as far as knowing which eco-region you know those seeds go to. So one is, and we have seed libraries. This has become very popular around the world. Gardening is the most popular hobby in America and many other places around the world. So we can do sort of a, from the ground up, all pun intended, protection of seeds. Have a citizen seed movement saying we are not going to let Monsanto and the boys do this. We are going to protect our seeds through what we're doing at Center for Food Safety and what other people are doing. This is very important because we love seed diversity. Diversity is our strength, whether that be in social policy. Diversity is not deficiency, which our current president and others seem to think. Diversity is our strength. And it's our strength for a number of very, very important scientific reasons. If you have only one particular type of corn and a corn blight comes, that's going to wipe out your entire corn. If you only have one seed variety. We had that in the country. It's called the Great Corn Blight in the 1970s. We had to get corn varieties from South America to survive that. The more different kinds of seed varieties you have, the more food security you have. If a blight comes in, it'll hit that one, but not that one, and you'll be able to survive that. So it's very important even to get dealing with seed pathogens. But it's also really important when we look at climate change, what I call climate chaos, because we don't know. We don't know what the climate's going to be in lots of parts, let's say, of the United States. We don't know what seeds we're going to need. Seeds we're probably not even using now. So if we massively monoculture these seeds, monoculture meaning just have a very few instead of having this diversity, we are not going to be prepared for the new kinds of agriculture we're going to need in those new climates. So seed diversity is absolutely critical. We have to stop the lock the usurpation of our entire seed future by these few chemical corporations. It is, if they were taking over all the water of the world or all the energy of the world, there would be an uproar. But people don't realize it's just as serious as they're trying to take over all the seeds of the world. Most people don't know that the United States Department of Agriculture was started during the Civil War to try and get food to the troops. But after the Civil War ended in 1865, what the United States Department of Agriculture did, it went around the world to get seed varieties. It would bring them back to the United States and give them for free to American farmers. Members of the House of Representatives actually would give these packets, of which hundreds of millions were given out over a period of several decades, free to farmers, saying, hey, see if this works. Because you remember America, we have so many different climate niches, so many different areas, the South and North, so many different things. They would go around the world saying, hey, this works in Sweden, this might work in the northern part of the United States, this works in more tropical areas, hey, this might work in the South. And they were all for free. So when the robber barons, as we came to know them, the Rockefellers, the Mellons, all these bankers, they began to look at agriculture in the beginning of the 20th century and said, we can't make any money on agriculture because they're giving all the seeds away, and we can't see a way, and they're making a lot of food, but it's all local. What are we going to do here? So the first thing they said was, let's stop giving those seeds away. So in 1924, they passed a law that said, stop, we're not going to give seeds away anymore. And then they began to say, could we create seeds that create a higher yield for one season, and then the next season won't work at all, or work very little, right? Because that way, that would force the farmers to come back to us every year for their seeds. So they began to hybridize along Mendelian principles and other principles, and in the middle of the 30s, right in the middle of the Depression, they succeeded. They created a hybrid corn that for one growing season gave you a lot more corn. If you tried to save those seeds and plant it the next year, you got a lot of garbage, right? This is underestimated as an extraordinary moment in the whole history of the 10,000-year history of the world in agriculture. Before that, all around the world, farmers had used the development of seeds to create more resilient, more longer-lasting seeds that would last for generations, that they could depend on. Now, for the very first time, millions were spent by the government and private interests saying, no, we want to create a seed that only lasts for one season and then basically commits suicide. So you have to come back to us. Well, during the Depression, there was a lot of needs. Farmers bought these seeds to get that 1 year out of it, and then had to go back to get that 1 year out of it, and the hybridization began. And it had some terrible effects. One terrible effect was the cost of seed. Well, farmers who'd been saving their seeds now were being outproduced by the ones that had these new hybridized seeds. So they would try and buy them, but the cost would be prohibitive. That overhead cost would create problems. And because they're oversupply with the same demand, the cost for the corn went down. Lots of farmers went out of business, right? Then they started playing with these hybrid seeds, saying, hey, we want hybrid seeds with corn, for example, thicker stalks that will allow for mechanical harvesting. Only mechanical harvesting. It would be very hard to harvest them otherwise. So mechanical harvesting, farmers that could afford the machinery could. More supply, equal demand, prices went down, farmers went out of business. As they went out of business, larger and larger farms, larger and larger monocultures, in come your insects, in come your fungi, and then we started having to use these pesticides. So this is what happened to American agriculture because of this moment of saying, instead of having plants that are resilient, we're going to create a commodity seed, a seed whose sole purpose is to have one growing season and then essentially die. We now call it Terminator technology, if you will. That was the earliest Terminator technology. So that is a tragic result of hybridization. And certainly books have been written about this, but most people believe that working with non-hybrids with the same kind of energy would have yielded the exact same growth in yields that we would have seen with hybridization. So let me tell you a quick story of the corn seed. So the corn seed is, of course, sacred in Mexico and through much of South America and Central America. Maize, right? Well, when we first hybridized crops, the first one we hybridized successfully was corn. So we took the sacred crop, we said instead of it being multi-generational. We were going to just have it grow for one growing season. Farmers have to go and buy it after one growing season. And that became more costly to be a farmer. And it turned this wonderful crop into a commodity that big money could sell, big business could sell. And that was the beginning of agribusiness in this country. And that then led to the mechanization. The corn that could only be harvested through mechanization led to huge monocultures of corn, which led to the whole problem of insect infestation, fungi infestation, weed infestation. That's why we have all these chemicals came after World War II. So the corn, this wonderful life-giving sacred corn seed, has now given birth to industrial agriculture, mechanical agriculture, and pesticides that we now call biocides. Well, at least they would leave the corn seed alone, right? Oh no. When they started genetically engineering seeds, they said, you know what? Corn is such a huge crop, let's go to corn. So they genetically engineered the corn in two ways. One is they took some bacterial DNA and they put it into the corn so that the corn will not be killed when you spray it with Roundup or other herbicides. You'll kill the weeds, but now the corn can withstand even aerial spraying. They did the same with soy, right? Aerial spraying. So now this life-giving sacred seed is being used as an excuse to use more and more herbicides, less and less responsible use of herbicide, more and more poisons in our food, in our children's bodies, etc. Then they said, we're also going to take a little piece of DNA from another bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis, and we're going to put that into every cell of the corn, and that's going to kill insects. So now we have an insecticide in every cell. So this corn seed now has in it, right? This bacteria is hybridized and has in it the DNA that makes it resist herbicides and the DNA that makes sure that there's insecticides in every cell of the plant that will grow. My God, this sacred plant, look what we've done to it. But is that all? Oh no. Then we said, well, that takes care of one aspect, but it's not really working. We're really concerned about it. So then they developed these systemic insecticides. And a lot of them are these neonicotinoid, these nicotine-based pesticides, insecticides are killing the bees. And there they don't mostly spray. That's the most widely used insecticide in the world right now, by the way. It's more like an M&M. They coat the seed like an M&M coating with this insecticide and a little fungicide too. And then when it's irrigated or it rains, that coating washes off, that coating of toxic neurotoxin insecticides, and then is sucked up into the plant through the water. As the plant brings the water through the plant, those dangerous neurotoxins are taken into every cell of the plant. That's why they call it systemic insecticide. The entire system of the plant, every cell has it. So now look at that corn seed from just a few hundred years ago, a couple 150 years ago, from sacred seed to hybridization to being the container for the herbicide tolerance, for the insecticide, and now for these dangerous neurotoxins. And according to a peer-reviewed scientific study, if a songbird today were to pick up just one corn seed, it would be fatal, with all these poisons now in that seed itself. And I can't come up with a more poetic, a better metaphor for this culture of death that is the basis for our modern agriculture than what we've done to the corn seed through hybridization, through genetic engineering, and now through these seed coatings. One of the things that you never hear, except in broadcasts like this one, is that we basically do not have a food agriculture in the United States. Most people think of agriculture, even agribusiness, well, it's producing food. We often say, oh, we're the food capital of the world, we're the most successful agriculture. Not true. Not true at all. We basically have what we would call a commodity agriculture, which is primarily not based in feeding people and feeding people important, nutritious, and diverse food, but rather produce commodities. And what do I mean by that? Right now, over 55% of all of our cropland in the United States is devoted to corn and soy. Yeah, well, the fact of the matter is that feeds directly almost no one. Over 40% of corn goes into gasoline. Another 50% of corn goes into animal factories, dairy factories, all these confinement operations for animals. A lot of the rest of it goes into high fructose corn syrup and all of these processed food agents that we don't need and we shouldn't have. And then we have some sweet corn over there that we eat, But the vast majority, well over 90% of all the corn that we produce, well over 90%, does not directly feed any American. And yet, well over a quarter of our cropland is devoted to it. What does it feed? It feeds the bottom line of Monsanto, because most of it's genetically engineered, over 90% of that's genetically engineered, and the big ag business companies who sell those commodities to the animal factories as fuel and for these processed agents. Same is true with soy. 30-40% of soy goes into gasoline. A huge amount of it goes into these horrifying chicken factories that it's so cruel and terrible. A huge amount of it goes into soy lecithin and all those things you see on the back of that package of the food that processed food nobody should be eating, and only a very, very small amount of that actually goes to humans to eat for food. So when we talk about great yields, we are talking about commodity agriculture, not food agriculture. If we were to say we're going to now judge American agriculture compared to world agriculture by nutrition per acre, not by dollar or yield per acre, we would be in a terrible, terrible position, way down in the world, because we don't produce that much nutrition per acre, because we're producing all this commodity agriculture, right? And yet nutrition is what we should be about. If the whole world adopted our agriculture, commodity agriculture, starvation would go even exponentially higher than it is right now. This is a terrible, terrible way to try and grow food. And this is really important to know. So when you hear the GMO guys, Monsanto say, "Oh, we need GMOs to feed the world." And if we're going to do that, we're going to, you people who are against GMOs, that means we're going to have to go into very sensitive areas and cut down the trees and kill everything so we can grow crops. Because wrong. Let's just take that 55+% of cropland that's going into commodities and actually get it into food. How's that? Different kinds of grains, right? Have diverse farms, small farms in those areas. Rejuvenate our farm communities. Rejuvenate our soil. Have the kind of, organic and beyond agroecological farming that we want. We could feed all of Americans and probably a good part of the world with that. Instead, we're using commodities for these bottom lines. So it is incredibly hypocritical for Monsanto and these people to say, "Oh, we're going to try and feed the world," when they're devoting well over half of our cropland to feeding their bottom line to these commodity crops. So it's really important to remember, commodity agriculture, nothing to do with nutrition, food. Food agriculture, that's less than half of what we do in this country, much less than half. You almost never hear that, but that's really what it's going to take, is to take that commodity agriculture, get it back into food agriculture, and that's one of the things we need to do to save our agricultural system. That's part of what our new food future looks like. One of the many problems there is with when we say, well, we are feeding this corn, at least we're feeding it to animals, then we're going to end up eating the animals. Well, first of all, that's not the natural, right? That's not the natural food. If you look at, right now, all these mega dairies, they're not dairies, they're milk factories. 15,000 cows, confined, horrible animal suffering, you name it, chemicals, you name it, right? Well, they're not feeding them hay, which is the natural food, right? Alfalfa, that natural food for dairy cows. They're feeding them corn, right? Which creates all sorts of digestive problems. It creates all sorts of physical problems for these animals, biological issues, right? They shouldn't be feeding them that at all, but it's profitable, so they do. And then if you look at the conversion, in other words, you look at all the calories that are going from those crops into those animals, there's a tremendous conversion loss, right? So in other words, for 1 calorie of beef, you're going to have many, 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 many calories of corn. For 1 calorie of chicken, and many soy. So it's a terrible conversion of those crops into calories, into energy. All it does is, again, fit the bottom line. So even though indirectly we're getting some of those calories, actually it is a terrible conversion rate, and it's a terrible suffering to those animals who shouldn't be eating these unnatural foods for them anyway. One of the major ways Monsanto and Bayer, Syngenta, Dow, DuPont, that they have of controlling our food supply is through patenting. Now, when Thomas Jefferson first had our first patent act, right at the end of the 18th century, right, he never imagined that you'd be patenting, seeds, plants, animals. He thought it was going to be for mechanical inventions. And so it was for many, 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 many decades and even centuries. But starting in 1980, during the Reagan administration, beginning of the Reagan administration, they said, you know what, let's try extend patenting to the patenting of life. And so they first patented a bacteria in 1980, and then in the next 5 to 6, 7 years, they allowed the first patenting of a plant, a genetically engineered plant, and then in 1987, the first patenting of a genetically engineered animal. So this began the patenting of life. Now this makes no sense, because if you think, you've created a new tennis racket. Well, for somebody to take your patented tennis racket and copy it, they're going to have to go to a factory, they're going to have to make it. If you have a patented pig or a patented corn plant, it naturally reproduces. Every one of those kernels is a reproduction. Every one of them is a violation of the patent. Every one of the piglets is a violation of the patent. So it means nature is working for the patent holder, creating violations every minute, making people have to pay royalties to that patent holder. It is a completely legally incoherent and nonsensical way. All it does is feed the bottom line of those who have those patents, right? Those patents on life. It is a complete misuse of patent law. And it's horrifying that it's been allowed in this country and many other countries around the world. So what happened was, at least in the beginning, because the first bacteria that was patented in 1980, the first plant that was patented, the first animal that was patented in the 1980s, they were all genetically engineered. So the idea was that at least that you have to genetically engineer a plant or an animal or a bacteria to have it patented. Turns out not to be. Vast majority of plants, are the thousands of plants that have now been patented, and they patent the seed, they patent often the cells of the plant, and then in this country you're allowed to patent the plant itself, not in Canada and some other countries, but in this country. So you can patent all of it, patent the seed, patent the genome, and you can patent literally everything from the genes to the cells to the plant itself in this country. You can patent that, right? And I will say, however, that we were able to get a wonderful Supreme Court victory that me and two other wonderful, an attorney and an activist put together many, many years ago. We went all the way to the Supreme Court, and we did have the Supreme Court rule that DNA is no longer patentable. So our hope is that we can get the Supreme Court, which has not always been I don't think anybody in the Supreme Court was ever a farmer and knows anything whatsoever about agronomy, but maybe now that we've said that DNA cannot be patentable, we can say, hey, cells cannot be patentable and certain plants cannot be patentable. So it's not a complete lost cause, but that is how they control the food supply, is by patenting the plants. They get 20 years of protection on that, and then they can actually, even after that, they can alter the patent in small ways. So this is a real major problem that we have not addressed. Obviously life should not be patentable, and this is how corporations can own our food supply. When we look at Monsanto and DuPont and Dow, but sometimes it just looks like, isn't this going to be just hopeless? They just seem to just win, and the government seems to be bought out by them, and our legislators they're paying all of their, we have this tremendous problem with electoral reform. They're giving all their money so they can be elected. But that's really not right at all, and on two major levels. One is, we've actually defeated them many times. And yes, the Center for Food Safety, we're known for our legal victories, but it's also grassroots victories as well. So, over my period of time working on this, we've defeated, through either market campaigns or through scientific work or straight litigation, we've defeated bovine growth hormone. Monsanto had to, sell that product because the labeling and litigation made it pretty much useless to them. There was the flavor saver tomato. The first genetically engineered, well, there turned out to be no, flavor to savor, and a marketing campaign got rid of that. The first genetically engineered potato, gone. Genetically engineered wheat, all right, through litigation and science and legal work, that's gone. Genetically engineered rice, that's not there, right? And so if you look at a huge number of these, imagine if all the rice out there were genetically engineered. Imagine if all the wheat out there were genetically engineered, right? Imagine if, all your animal products were genetically engineered. So there's been remarkable victories over these years that have kept some of our, there is not a single genetically engineered animal right now that is on the market, right? There's not a single genetically engineered food except this one sort of Botox apple that slices that may be out there that's on the market. And many of these things were stopped, as I mentioned, as well as wheat and rice and others have been stopped because of grassroots organizing and litigation. So we beat them over and over again, and we will beat them again in the future. Right now, we have already once stopped this Agent Orange crop from being out there. We're We're not back in litigation again. We're going to stop this dicamba from growing. We're in litigation to stop genetically engineered salmon from ever reaching our market. And if it does, it's going to have to be labeled according to the law that we got passed through Congress, right? So that's one aspect. You can take them on and stop a lot of the bad things they're trying to do. But the other is the growth of the alternative. What is the fastest growing sector in the United States? Not GMOs. Organic. Fastest growing sector. What is the most popular label on all food in the United States? The non-GMO label. Number one, right? And if you look around the world, there's actually far more organic, both certified and non-certified organic, in the world being grown than GMOs. Many more. Right? I often ask people, if you look around the world, what percentage do you think of our crops are GMO? And people go 40, 50. No, about 6%, 7%. It's been rejected around the world. So the picture is very, very different than the kind of pessimistic picture that the corporations, want to present out there. More and more people are saying no to industrial meat. More and more people are using farmers markets. They're growing all over the country. More and more people are using co-ops, right? So community-supported agriculture is everywhere. Organic is the fastest growing sector. And GMOs, and I'm happy to predict this and tell you, it will be the biggest failure in industrial agriculture. It's already on its way out. They got the science wrong, and they got the population wrong. They thought people would accept it. We're not accepting it. Ain't going to happen. And so you're going to see the end of the biotechnology so-called revolution within the next 5 to 10 years. Absolutely. And not just around the world, now in the United States as well. I mean, in non-GMOs everywhere, it's really important to understand that in the United States, the big force that was pushing genetically engineered foods was the Grocery Manufacturers Association, the GMA, right? Well, it turns out that people like Campbell's and Mars and Nestle's and Unilever have all left the GMA now, and they've taken their fees with them because that's an industrial trade organization. They rely on fees because they don't want to be part of this non-GMO labeling. They don't want to fight GMO labeling anymore. They don't want to fight transparency anymore. They want to be part of this new movement of the public that says we have the right to know. And more food companies are saying, you know what? And these are industrial food companies. We agree. You have the right to know. Forget you, GMA. So much so that GMA, in its recent comments to the United States Department of Agriculture, is now supporting GMO labeling, mandatory GMO labeling. And they spent literally $110 to $20 million fighting it in the last 6 or 7 years. One of the terrible things among many that Monsanto has done to the American agricultural system is really what it's done to farmers. Monsanto is a little like the mafia that way. They come into an area, they sell their genetically engineered corn to a certain number of farmers. And then they go to the other farmers and say, Farmer X over there and Farmer Y, your neighbors, they're going to be planting GMO corn. Well, the wind's going to carry over. You're going to get contamination. And when you get contamination, we're going to come on your farm. We're going to find our patented material, our patented genes, patented plants in your corn crop, and we're going to sue you. And here you are in Indiana, or here you're in Illinois. We're a multinational corporation. We've got the lawyers. What do you have? How are you going to fight us? And we're going to take your entire crop. You're going to go out of business. So you might as well buy the GMOs. It's the old protection racket, right? If you buy the GMOs, you're not going to get hurt. If you don't buy the GMOs, well, you're going to get contaminated, and we're going to come after you, and you're going to get sued, and you're going to be we're going to take you into St. Louis, wherever you live, because that's where we're going to have the court hearings, and you're going to be fighting good luck with you and your local lawyer fighting a multinational corporation. They've done this throughout the country, terrifying farmers. It's really, it's not just prosecution, it's persecution of these farmers and seed savers and seed cleaners. And if you want to get on our Center for Food Safety, www.centerforfoodsafety.org, we've issued reports that go through each one of these litigations and really show you how these farmers and seed savers and sometimes even small seed dealers have been sued. We try to give them the legal help that we can. There's been a couple of successes, but in general, it is really a unconscionable campaign by Monsanto to terrify, to persecute and prosecute, and thereby scare farmers into buying their products. One of the good things that there's been a number of states, and California is one of them, North Dakota, South Dakota, there's several states that because of our work have passed laws now that say you cannot sue farmers for accidental contamination Monsanto and you other companies. So there are a few states that have protections in place, but most states don't. And so this little reign of GMO terror, Monsanto can still and is still using on America's farm communities. And it turns farmer against farmer. And it's really another tragic consequence of Monsanto's wanting to feed its bottom line. It's important to remember that the genetically engineered seed market is relatively limited, both in this country and around the world. We've got over 90% of corn, over 90% of soy, huge percentage of cotton, large percentage of alfalfa and sugar beets. And that's about it. That's about it. All your other fruits, all your other vegetables, all your other grains, no. And even those crops are primarily in North America and in parts of South America, Brazil and Argentina. Almost nowhere else in the world. Almost nothing in Europe, nothing in Africa, very little in Asia. So that is a whole different perspective. So yes, it's a huge percentage of those few crops, well over 90% in most cases. But as far as the whole group of seeds in the world, tiny, tiny percentage. And where they're being planted, in only a very few countries. About 90% of all GMOs are planted either in Argentina, Brazil, the United States, or Canada. You know, for many years there, you could not read any New York Times or any other story, mainstream media story on genetically engineered foods without them saying, oh, genetic engineering has increased yield and reduced the use of pesticides. But there's still some people who don't like them. This was just commonplace. And both are lies, outright lies, right? Genetically engineered crops are not designed to increase yield. They're designed to allow primarily for the spraying of herbicides on them that normally would have killed them, but they've been engineered now to be able to tolerate them so they kill the weeds and not the corn, the soy, or the cotton. They're not made for more yield. By the way, even if there were more yield, it wouldn't mean more food because no one eats that stuff, right? Primarily, right? But it's not even for more yield. As a matter of fact, with soy, there's actually a yield drag. It actually creates less yield. Some people say it's because of the kind of soy they're using. Other people think it's because of genetic engineering. But the bottom line is about a 5% yield drag. So it does not increase food. It was never intended to increase food or yield in any way. It's there to increase the use of herbicides, of chemicals. That's why Monsanto, DuPont, Dow sell them. They are not food companies. They are chemical companies. Their job is to pay off their shareholders through the increased sale of chemicals. They invented a technology that increases the sale of chemicals. That is what they do. Anything about increased food or less chemical use would be ridiculous. Why would a company that is thriving on the use of these chemicals want less chemical use? It's comical and it's very sad. You don't see it much anymore, but it's very sad that all those years the mainstream media just went along with that mantra. It's ridiculous. GMOs do not increase food, they do not increase yield, and they massively increase the use of these biocides. End of story. Monsanto owns over a quarter. Right now it's probably around 26, 27% of the world's commercial seeds. So Monsanto, because of the government subsidies that are given to these biofuels, remember, a huge percentage, depends on what you read, 35 to 45% of all of our corn and a slightly lesser percentage of our soy is going into gasoline. So Monsanto became a fuel company. You think of Exxon or you think of some other fuel. No, Monsanto and some of the other GMO guys became, hey, we're selling fuel. And the government's paying for it. The government's subsidizing us. By the way, for no reason. It does not help with climate change, climate chaos, nothing. It doesn't help with that. So it's really just it's just corporate welfare for Monsanto. But they were able to use that money, that huge amount of money that they were getting for selling this fuel and being subsidized as well, to buy up seed companies. And that's what they've been doing all over the world. It's kind of their plan B. They know that the weeds are going to get eventually completely resistant to all of their chemicals. They know that the world of genetically engineered crops, or at least 90+% of it, is going to be over in a very few years, 5 to 10 years. Nature will bat last. It is already batting last. And they know the world's not going to accept it. So this whole supposed revolution is going to be over. But they have a plan B. They're going to laugh all the way to the seed bank. They're going to say, you know what? GMOs are gone, but we own the seeds of the world, folks. And good luck. We're trying to get them and not pay us. So that's their plan B. And now they're consolidating. We're going to have mostly 3 companies, because Monsanto is going to be consolidating with Bayer. Dow is being consolidated with DuPont. Syngenta is being consolidated with ChemChina. So soon we're going to have these 3 monoliths. They're going to own 60-70% of the world's seeds, and that is their plan. GMOs will be forgotten, and all their promises and all that nonsense will be gone, but very, very scary for us. And this is something that we need to address on a worldwide basis, both by saving our own seeds, starting a citizen seed movement, and making sure that our governments do not allow this to continue to happen. The most oft-repeated defense of industrial agriculture is that it is needed to feed the world. People say, Andy, I love organic. I know Center for Food Safety is, promoting organic. We like organic too, don't get us wrong, but, forget it. You're not going to feed the world, with organic. Take industrial agriculture. This is wrong in so many ways. One of it is that, as we've discussed, it is really important to know that industrial agriculture primarily sells commodity crops, not food crops. That's what makes its big money, not on food, but on commodities like corn and soy and cotton that they don't sell for food directly. They sell for gas, for other products, and et cetera. So, but the other thing is that there have been peer-reviewed studies by the United Nations, by Michigan State, by other universities and entities around the world that have said, you know what, the only way we're going to feed the world is through medium and small-sized farms that use organic or other sustainable methods. Because that's the only way we're going to get the diversity of foods that we need to feed the world. Even if we were eating that corn and soy that they make, which we're not, you cannot feed the world on corn and soy. You need a wide diversity of crops. That can only happen within the small scale and medium scale setting. So the peer-reviewed science that we have, not just good thinking, we love organic and isn't that nice, says that because of the massive overhead costs, because of the economies of scale that only allow industrial agriculture to have these massive monocultures, that's the only way that works, right? You cannot feed the world based on those huge monocultures, both because you need the diversity and because that kind of overhead would be impossible for a medium or small size farm. So we have the science, now we've got to get the policy. Anybody can look up the science and say, hey, the next person that tells you we need industrial agriculture to feed the world is being anti-science. That's an anti-science person. That is a science denier. We have the science. We know it's medium to small-sized organic and or sustainable agricultural farms. That is the future, or it will have to be the future if we're going to feed the world. We know through our loss of topsoil, through our loss of water supply. We know through the poisoning of our wildlife. 75% of all endangered species on our list are there because of farming and ranching. We know through the destructions of our great river systems. We know through what's happening in childhood obesity and the epidemic of childhood cancers. We know, and through the brain damage that's happening through the toxins in our food, we know that our industrial food system has caused enormous environmental harm and is contributing tremendously to this climate chaos that threatens the biochemistry of the entire planet. We know it threatens our health and our children's health. So it's an environmental crisis and it's a health crisis. But I would also say to everyone out there, it's a moral crisis. It's a moral crisis for each of us. Because even though we're called consumers, like a fire consumes a house, we're not. Every decision that I make, that you make, that your community makes on the foods that we buy, the foods that we feed our children, the foods that we grow, is going to create a different food future. It's going to create either more of this environmental disaster, this horrifying health crisis, this criminal animal suffering. It's going to contribute to that. My choice, your choice, will contribute to that if you make the wrong choice. If you go to a fast food place, if you buy industrial food, that's what you're feeding. That is the monster you're feeding. So you're not a mere consumer. You are helping create that terrible world that we need to get rid of. Or you're going organic and beyond, You're either eliminating or massively reducing your meat consumption. You're going non-GMO. You're going, making the right choices, going local, appropriate scale. Those are the right choices. And that is then creating this new food future, the one that we need to have healthy people, to have a humane system, a socially just system, and a healthy planet. So this is not just, this is terrible and that's terrible. This is a moral crisis for each one of us. We have the choice, each one of us with our dollar, to vote every day for one future or the other future. And I think we all need to join together to make sure that we make the right choice to that local, appropriate scale, humane, socially just, biodiverse, climate-friendly future that future generations are going to depend on. Years ago, when I was writing my book, The Human Body Shop, I had a chapter on genetic engineering, and I learned that the United States Department of Agriculture, with our taxpayer dollars, was funding research to take human growth genes and genetically engineer them into pigs. The idea was to create, and this is according to the researcher Vern Purcell at USDA was doing this, pigs as big as a barn. Well, I wanted to see this experiment. What was this like? So I went out to Beltsville, Maryland, where this was being done, and visited Dr. Purcell and at this USDA station. And I said, can I see this pig? And I saw pig 6707. And yeah, they had gotten that human growth gene in every cell, genetically engineered it at an embryo stage, and got that in every cell of that pig. But the pig was a tragic comic, just a terribly tragic thing. I mean, it couldn't stand up. I had to put it up against a sort of plywood board to be able to photograph it. Musculature, because of this growth genes, had completely collapsed in on it and making it muscle bound, but it couldn't move. It was cross-eyed, bow-legged. It was just a terrible, terrible thing. And I said to Dr. Purcell, well, what happened here? And he said, well, the Wright brothers didn't get it correct the first time either. It took them several. And I realized that this is a terrible, kind of a cold evil. He wasn't, oh, I love to torture animals. But there was this view of life, of all life, as a machine that can be made more efficient through genetic engineering. And I think if you look at the terrible suffering of the 10 billion animals that we use every year in our factory farm system, if you look at the 10 million farmers that have been lost and the 5 million farms, if you look at the horror that's going on with our communities there, the destruction of our water supplies, the poisoning of our rivers and our air, the cancers among our population, among our children, these things. This is not being done by people who are like terrorists, people who are full of hot emotions. This is cold evil. I call it cold evil. You won't hear about it in your churches on Sunday, or you're unlikely to, or your synagogues, or your mosques. This is the cold evil of bottom line thinking that looks at competition, profit, and efficiency in the market overall. The entire biotic community, and now threatening the biochemistry of the entire planet through climate change, what I call climate chaos. That's a cold evil, and as people of conscience, we have to sort of add that to our lexicon now. Of course we don't want to see terrorists. Of course we hate to see crimes of violence in our streets. But that is not what is causing the greatest threat to us. It's the cold evil of these corporations and the technologies they use that are causing, again, the greatest challenge to our planet and to the massive suffering of the human population, the animal population, the plant population, the entire body community every day. And that is what we should be focusing on with our righteous moral outrage, is those folks that are giving this kind of cold, evil worldview and trying to have it win. Instead of what we know we want empathy, we want love, we want respect, we want to re-embed ourselves in the patterns of nature, and we want to make sure that we participate and we have within our empathetic circle all the living things on this earth and the planet itself. Two very different ways to proceed. And I think it's an important perspective to have as an overview as we look at all these issues. I feel that the mainstream media is pretty much ignoring the environmental crisis, the health crisis that our industrial agricultural system is giving us, And if you extend that, the crisis that our pharmaceutical industry is bringing us, that the bottom line of these corporations, the bottom line of this system is anti-nature, it's anti-health, and our physical health and our psychological health, and some might even say our spiritual health, is at risk. And we've reached a crisis point now. It has become so pervasive that we need voices. And a conference like this offers me and many others a chance to reach audiences out there, and the great work that's being done here. Through these interviews, through streaming, we have the opportunity through technology now to get this word out. And I certainly feel as the Executive Director of the Center for Food Safety, that it is my job to get the word out as often as I can. And I really am pleased and so always delighted to take part in conferences like this and any throughout this country and that get this word out in this way. And what I like about a holistic conference such as this one is it's covering so many aspects of health. So not just the food issue, not just the pharmaceutical issue, but all these different aspects of the crises that people face and the choices that people are going to have to make every day about what happens to their children, about the food that's given, the pharmaceuticals that are given, that happens to their communities. This gives them the information to make those decisions. Otherwise, they're lost in information out there, and most of it false is being given by the big companies. So it's always a privilege to partake in conferences like this. It's always, I'm always grateful for the opportunity to speak. People often say to me, haven't we gone too far? Andrew, I mean, I know you do great work at the Center for Food Safety and so many other groups that you're allied with. You've got a million members and it feels good. But haven't we gone too far? Will we really be able to stop, the global warming crisis or, climate change? What about, this whole system, has it gone too far? Are you optimistic about change, the change that we all know we have to make? And I always say there's a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism says I've looked at all the facts and I'm now very optimistic that this is going to be the outcome. Anybody that looks at our world right now and is optimistic, I don't think is looking at the facts correctly. But I'm very hopeful. And, I often ask this to audiences in my lectures. I say, can you find any single historian or anyone who predicted that the Berlin Wall would come down? No one did. No one's able to ever show me one essay, even one historian anywhere that said, this is going to happen soon. We were hopeful, but not optimistic, and it happened. When Nelson Mandela, the great hero, when he was in prison, I don't think anybody was optimistic, A, that he was ever going to get out of prison, much less become the head of South Africa, much less that instead of being vengeful, start these reconciliation councils all across the country. That would have seemed bizarrely hopeful. Even a few years ago, I was not optimistic that we would see the massive growth of organic or the non-GMO movement. We were going to fight, but now I walk into an Exxon gas station and there's 4 different kinds of organic milk being sold. And you turn on the TV and there's a pet food advertising itself as non-GMO. I wasn't optimistic we would see that in such a short time. I was hopeful, but we've seen it. All right? I was not optimistic I would see a black president in my lifetime. Totally not optimistic. But I was hopeful, and it happened. So what I would say to people out there, don't worry about optimism, but stay hopeful, and don't worry about immediate success. We're not called necessarily to be successful. We're called to be faithful. We're saying we see the world in a certain way. We have spent lots of time and energy finding out the truth about our foods, about the pharmaceuticals, about what's going on in our world, with energy, what's going on. We know that, so we're going to stay faithful to that truth. Whether it's success in the short term, don't worry about that. We're going to stay faithful to that, and we're going to act in a manner that merits victory, even if we don't always have immediate victory. And we're going to say to ourselves, A, we're going to stay faithful, and B, we're going to stay hopeful. And if you do, and I've been doing this for decades, I'm not burned out, I'm not cynical, I'm not pessimistic even. I'm hopeful, and I'm faithful in our combined work. And I think that's the key to remaining active and to keeping the good fight going. Say, keep the faith. It's a good motto.